Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today's word of the day is authentication. Now, what is authentication? If you saw the identification video, which gives a little bit more background, authentication is proving identity within a system. So, what identification was bringing forth evidence of identity. So when you do that, you might bring a photo ID along or something that proves that you are who you say you are. And authentication is the process in which a system will verify that. Now, systems are so important because they allow for consistent and replicable processes to be executed. They essentially form standards around, in this particular case, identification. So authentication is very, very important, especially when we're doing anything online, because we want to verify and securely control our identities when we're in a virtual environment. And the way that process actually happens is a system will gather data or information from a series of inputs. It will process those inputs based on whatever rules have been created or designed in order to form that system, and it will provide an output. And that output will be, let's say, access to something in particular. So you've already probably very familiar with this, and this is not taken online, but when you are going home and you grab the keys that you actually have to enter your home, you actually have to be able to put that key in. And if you have physical keys, you have to insert that key into a lock, turn the lock to unlock the door, and then be able to be granted access. And that's actually a form of a system. That's a mechanical system. But just like any system that exists in the physical world, those mechanical systems can get hacked. And locksmiths actually understand how locks work. So in the event that you were, let's say, locked out of your house for the fact that, let's say, you lost a key, a locksmith will be able to grant access. Now, you want that process to be secure, and again, that represents an emergency, but at the same time, that information of how that system works is so very important to protect your home. So, when you go online, the same rules apply. Authentication is essentially going to allow you to be verified for who you actually are, or whatever you need access control for. So I wanted to give a little bit of background of why authentication is important, how it works in the physical world, and then we're going to kind of look at the virtual world and see how that actually applies. Now, I told you how information was actually gathered, but there are three elements when you're actually thinking about authentication. And the very first, or probably the most familiar with, is what you actually know. And so if you're familiar with the concept of a password is something that you know that can grant you access to something. So in the particular case of a virtual environment, when you have a password, let's say the password is to your email account. So in order to access your email account, you not only need to know the domain, so in other words, your email address, you need to know that first. You also need to have a password. And if you know the address and you know the password and you do that on the correct site, the correct URL, you will be granted access to your account. And so what you know, that is something that we use all the time, what we know, based on what we know. And so that's usually considered something unique. However, if that were ever compromised, and someone else could grab your password, they could go on to your email account or whatever other account based on that information being compromised. So considering that can be a problem, we have so many other elements that we can actually use to identify ourselves a little bit more uniquely online, and not with something that is just up here that someone else can grab. So some of the advances that have happened within the last couple decades, honestly, has been who you are. So who you are may be what you look like as far as your face. It may be your fingerprint. It could be the sound of your voice. So all of these are considered biometrics. So anything that identifies who you are based on, let's say, your person is considered biometrics. And those are all characteristics that exist within the physical world, but they can be digitized into data and used by a system to actually verify identity. So what you know, again, something that was used very, very commonly and still used, but by itself it's not as strong. But when you actually take into account who you are, that can be something that provides a little bit more uniqueness to your interactions online. But that's not it. There's one more piece, and one more piece is what you have. So what you had, it could be, let's say, a physical key, right? And that physical key is something that maybe is not shared, and only a few folks actually have access. So keys, again, were something that were used in the physical world very commonly, and what you have in the digital world could represent a rolling code. So it could be, I know I use Google Authenticator, and I use the codes that are provided there, because what it does is it gives you a rolling key, almost as though you've seen in some of the shows or the movies where you'll have a series of rolling digits, but it's all based on what's called an algorithm. And all an algorithm is a set of steps that essentially in which the code actually changes. And so that's actually has a unique signature to it. So it only changes in a particular way. And that's matched up with an account you actually have online. So that rolling code, when you actually use that, let's say log into your email account and you have to use that rolling code in addition to actually log into your account, that's another factor of security. So what you know, what you are, what you have, those are the three components that can actually create a secure authentication process when you actually go online. And the goal for everything is for that information to be unique. So when you use a single factor, you may have some uniqueness there, but if you use multiple factors, it makes it very, very hard to try to bypass. All right. So when you have the result from a authentication system, you actually verify identity, and based on whatever instructions happen after that, you can grant access. You can do a number of different things, whatever that next step would actually be. Now, the challenge, anytime you gather data, information, and input, is that it can be copied and or replicated. And so to address those challenges, change is incredibly important when you consider authentication. You don't want to keep, let's say, the same password across all of your accounts. Or you don't want to keep the same password for 10, 15, 20 years. Because if it's compromised, then you have a challenge, and whatever happened between the moment it was compromised and now, things could have happened that you don't even have a clue about. Another way that some of these challenges can be addressed with a copy and replication is the transmission itself needs to be secured or limited. So anytime you go online and you're entering your secure information, you want to make sure you see a little lock or HTTPS for secure sockets layer, so that you know when you're passing information, it's not just in the clear. And when I mean in the clear, like, I can actually, if you can actually see the information that you're passing along, and there was no code that it was around, or if it was not encrypted, it would be very easy to observe. And you want to essentially avoid that because there's a lot of stuff that happens on the internet, and you just want to make sure whatever you pass is secured. And you also want to make sure that you limit what you send out and who you send it out to. Not everyone needs to know your information, so just be cognizant and not giving out to everyone. And then last but not least is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication means you're using more than one factor. Remember, the three factors: what you know, what you are, what you have. You're using more than one of those. So that's what challenge actually exists, and those are some ways to actually address it. Now, as far as the best recommendations that I could give you for today in regards to authentication, is that you want to change your passwords and your keys, especially doing anything online, regularly. Don't keep the same passwords and keys. You want to have a process for changing that up. How often do you want to change it up? Well, it depends on how sensitive the account is. If it's a bank account, you probably want to change it once every 3 months. If it is an email account, you probably also want to change that once every 3 months. But if it's something that, if it got compromised, it wouldn't be an issue, you're probably not even worried about it. But you want to make sure you incorporate change as a part of your authentication process. The next piece, if you submit any personally identifiable information online, you want to make sure it's in a secure environment. So remember, you're looking for HTTPS or a lock symbol when you're actually going online and you're entering that information. You want to make sure that it's going to be secured. And then last but not least, use multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is essentially going to allow you... Oh man, I'm being called, right? I guess my wife found me. So the recommendations for the multi-factor authentication is making sure you just use more than one factor. Use at least two. It really helps, especially with bank accounts, emails, and they're actually making that easier for you to implement. So with that, just I'm safe now. So as far as the recommendations, I recommend all those pieces, but even more so, I recommend some of the solutions that exist out there that make that process easier for you. That it will give you reminders when you need to change your password. It'll ask you the question of, do you want to use multi-factor authentication or not? And there are a number of systems that already do that, but it would be great to have it all in a single suite. And if you heard about what I mentioned as far as my recommendation on the identification video, it is LastPass. I think the slogan is the last password you'll ever need. So that has a really sort of very cool setup, a lot of features, and honestly, if you have a lot of accounts, you need to have some type of password manager in place to make the process easier for you. So again, it's not only about security, it's also about ease of use. So I hope you appreciate this video, and hope you're authenticating yourself when you go online. You're doing that securely in a way that is going to keep you safe as far as your friends and family as well. And don't forget about the backups and put a system in place that's going to work for you. So I hope you enjoyed this segment. I'll catch you on the next one. There'll be plenty more just talking about IT for this month. So catch you on the next clip. Bye.